Shavua Tov, we're continuing with Mesil Shasharm, Path of the Just, and we're starting with chapter 14. It's a new chapter, so it's a great time if you're just joining us for the first time. And we use the Art Scroll edition, which is on page 290. And now we're talking about the different aspects of Perishus. Now, what is Perishus? Perishus means abstinence, abstaining from things that are even allowed according to the Torah. We mentioned several weeks ago that there are two general levels. There's being a tzaddik and there's being a chassid. A tzaddik is a person who is totally righteous. He follows all of the dictates of the Torah to the letter of the law. A chassid is a step beyond. A chassid is somebody who not only observes the entire Torah, but he does things above and beyond. He goes beyond the call of duty to do things to get even closer to Hashem. Now, the reason a person would do this is because why are we here? Why are we on earth? What's the meaning of our lives? So what we learned from Mesil Shasharm, which a concept he repeats many, many times, is that the purpose of life is to serve Hashem, to get closer to God, because after this world, we're going to be in the next world. And the reward we get in the next world is based on the spiritual attainments and to the degree which we serve God in this world. And that entails following the Torah, living selfless lives, and making spirituality the focus of our life and not material success. So a person, when those are a person's goals, and he wants to live according to them, so obviously he would want to go above and beyond the call of duty to do as much as he can. Now, something we've also mentioned, which is important to keep in mind, is that knowing the concepts is one thing, but putting them into practice is another. It's very difficult, right? The biggest distance in the world is between the head and the heart. So we're learning these concepts, and it's very important that if a person is growing spiritually, that it has to be done in small steps. A very bad thing to do is to take big spiritual steps, to totally renounce all physical pleasures overnight is not a healthy thing to do. But we're learning all of these concepts so that we know what the ideal is, so that we can put them into practice in our lives by taking each level step by step. So we're on page 290 in the Art Scroll edition, the beginning of chapter 14. Chelkei ha-Perishus ha-Rashim Shloisha. The three main categories of Perishus are of abstinence. There are three main categories, three heads, if you call them. Kihina yesh Perishus behanos. There is Perishus in enjoyments, Perishus bedinim, Perishus in law, Perishus b'minhagim, and Perishus in the way somebody acts. And we're going to explain these three ways of Perishus. Ha-Perishus behanos. What is Perishus in hana, in enjoyments? Humashi is karam beperak hakaidim. It's what we mentioned in the previous chapter, Dehainu. Shelo lakachas medivrei ha'olam elamashe hatzori ha'chriach. To only take what you need from this world, the physical world, what you need. So it means that a person shouldn't overindulge in physicality. A person doesn't have to have, the finest foods and the most expensive, go to the most expensive restaurants. But a person should live modestly within his means. Now, when it says, they quote here from somebody, I don't remember who it was, that I think Ramedes Solomon said it. Now, the ideal here is using the physical world to what you need, but it doesn't mean technically you could survive with maybe some bread and water. That's not what it means. It means the lowest amount of physical pleasure that you could live and have an enjoyable, happy life. Right? That you have what's called Yishuv Hadas. You don't starve yourself, but you also don't overindulge in physical pleasures. You have that minimum amount that you be content. Be content with that minimum amount. But it doesn't mean, unless you're obviously maybe on someone who's like a very, very high spiritual level, maybe a great tzaddik or a great rabbi, maybe they would only eat bread and water, a very unique type of person, but I imagine they wouldn't be listening to my shiurim, so we won't be talking about them. Okay, V'davar zeh yakif. Now, what does this mean to have Perishus when it comes to hana? V'davar zeh yakif al kol ma shehu tanug le'echad min hachushim. All of these things relate to pleasures from the senses. V'hainu, b'machalos, which are when it comes to eating, that's what we mentioned. B'bi'ilos, when it comes to relations. B'mabushim, what a person wears. B'tiulim, the trips that he takes, right? Is he going on extravagant vacations and paying thousands of dollars to go on very fancy cruises? Or maybe just, takes a more modest vacation to Williamsburg, Virginia or something. B'shmuos v'chol kiyotzi b'zeh. and the conversations and other things that he does. Rak biyamim she'oneg behem mitzvah. He only indulges in these things when enjoyment is a mitzvah. Now, what days are enjoyments a mitzvah? A mitzvah? Shabbos and Yantiv. Shabbos, there's a mitzvah to have good foods, and Yantiv, there's a mitzvah to have good foods. So on those days, interestingly enough, it sounds like there's no inyan of being a parish, no inyan of abstaining from these physical desires. So during the week, a person should abstain from an overindulgence in these physical pleasures, but on Shabbos, it's a different story. Now, why is there a mitzvah to have a joyous meal on Shabbos and Yantiv? So the reason is because when we do something physical, we are physical beings. So when we do something physical on Shabbos and Yantiv, we drive the ideas of Shabbos and the ideas of Yantiv, we drive them home. So when we eat a Suda, when we have a Shabbos meal, we inculcate the ideas of Shabbos within ourselves by doing a physical act of eating that makes the ideas of Shabbos become a part of us. Okay, so that's one area. That is Perishus in enjoyment. Now what about the next two areas? Perishus b'dinim, Perishus in law. Hu lahachmer behem tameh. That means a person is a parish. He is always stringent when it comes to Jewish law. Lachash afilu l'divrei yachid b'machlokes im tamonira afilu she'en halach kamoso u'b'tanai shaliyah chamro kulo. He says one example of this is that usually in Jewish law, not always, if you have a debate between two groups of scholars, the law is in accordance with the group that has more members. The majority rules. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with following the majority, even if they're the lenient opinion. Now let's say, so here he's saying that a parish, someone who wants to go above the letter of the law, he would be stringent according to the minority opinion if their reasoning seems more mistaber, more logical to him. So even though according to the letter of the law you can go with the group of scholars that are lenient because they're the majority, someone who wants to go above the letter of the law would be stringent according to the minority opinion. And he says, interesting, he adds here, on the condition that his leniency won't lead to a stringency. That his stringency won't lead to a leniency. So what does that mean, a stringency not leading to a leniency? Sometimes if someone takes a halachic stringency upon himself, it could actually lead to a leniency in another area. I think there's a story, I think it was about Rav Yisrael Salanter, that everyone was washing their hands for the meal, for Hamotzi, and they were using a lot of water. It's a mitzvah to use a lot of water when you wash your hands. Make sure the water covers every area of the hand and use a good amount. Rav Yisrael Salanter was using a very small amount of water, and they asked him, why don't you use a lot of water? So he said, because you see the old woman whose job it is to schlep the water? If I use more water, then she's going to have to go back and forth more times to schlep it. So why should I be more stringent to use water if it's going to cause an old woman to have to work harder? So the idea is that whenever we take upon halachic stringencies upon ourselves, we have to investigate and make sure that it's not going to lead to leniencies in other areas, because obviously, like Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, it's much more important to be sensitive to the feelings of an elderly woman than it is to have a flowing amount of water when you wash your hands for bread. Okay. And another example of Perishus when it comes to halacha is to be stringent in questions of Jewish law, even when you could be lenient. Ukvar be'arnu lanu chacham zichron livracha ma'amir Yecheskel. What Yecheskel said, Hine nafshi lo mituma. Yecheskel shelo achalti mebehema shehora bo chacham. Yecheskel was so stringent that if he even has sometimes, back in the day, you would have a chicken and you weren't sure if it was kosher, so you would bring it to the rabbi, and the rabbi would tell you if it's kosher. So if Yecheskel, when he would bring the animal to the rabbi, even if there was even a question that he had to bring it to the rabbi, he wouldn't eat it. That's how stringent he was. If there was any hint of a question of whether the animal was kosher, he wouldn't eat from it. Now, this is not something which is required. Totally allowed. You're a 100% good Jew. If you have a question on a chicken, you bring it to the rabbi says you could eat it, no problem, eat it, all good. But if you want to go above the letter of the law, like Yecheskel, what he did, if there was even a question that arose, he wouldn't go near it. And he wouldn't eat from this certain type of meat that was slaughtered when it was dying. It has to do, if an animal died by itself without being ritually slaughtered, it wasn't kosher. So if the animal was about to die, they would slaughter it very quickly. So he would not even eat from that. For sure, all of this is allowed according to the letter of the law. He was stringent upon himself. Right, and there are different standards for those that are prushim that want to go above the letter of the law than the rest of the Jewish people. They distance themselves. Those people who want to go above the letter of the law distance themselves from any hint of wrongdoing. Mar Ukva said in the Gemara, Anak b'hai milsa chala bar chamr l'gabei abba. Mar Ukva said, the sage in the Gemara said, I am like vinegar, the son of wine, compared to my father. What did he mean? The ilu abba kad achol bisra ha'idna. Lo hava achol gvina ad lamachar kehashta. V'ana b'hasudasa lo achelna. Sudasa achrisa achelna. We all know that a person can't eat meat and milk together. So Mar Ukva said that his father, if he ate meat one day, he wouldn't eat milk until the day after. He waited a whole day between meat and milk. Mar Ukva said, I'm not as holy, I'm not on that spiritual level, so I eat meat for one meal and then I'll have milk, 6 hours later at the next meal, or 3 hours later if you're German. But the idea is here that there are different levels, that you can be a tzaddik or you can be a parish. You can go above the letter of the law. And there are different levels for different people. Mar Ukva felt that he wasn't on the level to imitate his father's Perishus, his father's piety. And therefore he didn't do it. It's very important to know what level we're on. That's why it's good to have a spiritual advisor, because unfortunately, sometimes people take on certain spiritual stringencies where they're not ready for it, and then that's not a good thing either. So it's very important. First step is to recognize ourselves, what level we're on, and then act accordingly. For sure, the law is not like his father said, right? That his father did. There's no law that you can't eat. You have to wait 24 hours after you eat meat to eat milk. If it was the halacha, Mar Ukva would have done it too. His father was very stringent when it came to his Perishus. Therefore, he used to call himself vinegar, the son of wine, because he wasn't on the level of Perishus like his father. So we discussed 2 of the 3 areas so far. Next week we will discuss the 3rd area of Perishus. Actually, you know what? Let's do the 3rd one now. It's almost we're almost at the end. Anyway, it's not so long. Perishus b'minhagim. What is the Perishus in the way one acts? Hu hisbodedus v'hibodel min ha'chevra hamedinis lefanos libo al avoda v'hisbonenus bo karoi. Perishus in minhagim, the way someone carries himself, refers to that sometimes a person should separate himself from people and be alone to contemplate. Right? There's no prohibition of being around people, obviously, but a parush, something that is good. This is really a good spiritual practice for everybody. Very often we're always around people, at least not in 2020, right? Back in the past, we used to always be around people. So it's a good idea to have some solitude so we can think to ourselves, get in touch with our spiritual selves, to think about our goals in life and what's important to us and how we can actualize those spiritual goals. And actually, that is a benefit for those that are, have less social interaction now because of Corona. This is something that would be a great time to start doing. Now, if a person's going to do this, he has to be careful not to go to the extreme. The rabbi said, a person should interact with people. Right? A person can't totally cut himself off from society. We're not supposed to be hermits, live by ourselves in a mountain. A person should interact with society, but rather, once in a while, he should go and he should be alone to contemplate. V'chein amru, cherev al abadim v'nalu, cherev al saneim shal talmidei chachamim, sheyeshvim bad bebad v'oskim b'torah. Al yischaber ha'adam im ha'tovim, zman ma shemitztarech lo limudo lo parnaso, v'yizbodid achar kach li'davik be'elokav l'hasik darcha yoshev avoda amitis. Also, Torah scholars, they shouldn't only learn alone because they might make mistakes. They need other Torah scholars to discuss with. So rather, a person should have good friends, because bad friends, they negatively influence a person. So a person should have good friends, and that's who he should hang around for whatever he needs for his Torah study and for his job. But he should have separate times to contemplate. But included in this also is that a person shouldn't be a yapper. He should have limit his speech so that he shouldn't talk emptiness, to just prattle away is also not a good character trait. Just the people who talk about nonsense. That's not a positive character trait. So included in Perishus is limiting the amount that one speaks nonsense. Very pious people, they don't look out of their Daled Amos. You see the famous video of the Chafetz Chaim that became public a few years ago. You see him walking and he's just looking right in front of him. He's not, glancing at everything around. He's just focused, looking in his own 7.5 cubits. And this is something that a person does, and when a person practices these things, eventually it will become second nature to him. Okay, these three ways of Perishus that we mentioned, even though I said them in general terms, short general terms, they include many actions and details, all of these things. But we didn't talk, like we mentioned earlier, we didn't talk about the details, because the details are going to differ for each person. So the Ramchal is just giving us these three general principles of the ways of Perishus, and a person, it's up to him or her to decide which details apply to him. But these are the general goals for a person who wants to achieve these great lofty spiritual heights. So again, we had three ways of Perishus. One was in limiting pleasures, physical pleasures. Two was being stringent in Jewish law. And three was at times distancing himself from society. A person should have a set time to contemplate and limit needless speech, and to only look in his 7.5 cubits, his Daled Amos, and to have that certain time. It's very important to have at least, once a week, whatever you can do. Shabbos is a great time to just sit and contemplate, what am I here for? What am I doing? How can I improve spiritually? How can I work on my character traits? And to connect with Hashem. We're so busy all the time interacting with other people, we don't have time to sit and to analyze our own spiritual lives in a way we can grow. And as always, if anyone wants to discuss this further or discuss how it applies to them individually, please reach out. You have my email, phone number. Always glad to talk, and have a beautiful week.